Hello, welcome to Call the Doctor, live from your public media studios. I'm George Thomas. Because of the tremendous advancements in brain imaging and being able to literally see how the brain functions in real time, this has led to a watershed of new understanding of just how the brain works. Because we have that new understanding of how the brain works, how it acquires information, how it stores that information, how it retrieves and then processes that information, all of this has led to new approaches in teaching. And those new approaches to teaching, well, it's not the way your parents learn their ABCs. Separate, but alongside the same time frame of advancements in brain imagery in the last 20 years, came a new concept that was born 20 years ago. Dr. Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. Multiple intelligences, or MI, has found its way into classrooms in very practical ways, in forms of new approaches to teaching our kids. Now, during this episode of Call the Doctor, we have experts in both fields and will combine the new research of the brain with the practical theory known as MI being used in schools, and we'll ask the big question: are we teaching our children today differently than our parents learned? And more importantly, does it work? And in terms that you and I can understand, just how does it work? It's a big topic and very relevant in today's competitive world as we teach our children. As I tell every panel before every show I do, I am not a doctor or an expert, and that's why they're here. The interesting part of it for me is to have these experts explain this to you and I in terms we understand. Well, we've assembled regional experts and they're ready to answer your questions about how the brain works and how this can help us educate our children better. Let's meet our panelists right now. Guest is Dr. Andrea Seidman, the Vice President of the National Early Childhood Program Accreditation and the Education Chairperson for the National Child Care Association. She is also the founder and Vice President of the Andrea Seidman Foundation for Inclusive Education. Dr. Seidman, let's bring you in here on this. You are the Vice President of the National Early Childhood Program Accreditation. Now, I'm 48 years old, so I graduated high school in 1982, went to college, and then pretty much, I think, like everybody, forgot about school. Wanted to go into, work and do this. But now I have children. They're 11 and 12 years old, and I just assume that they are being taught the same way I was taught in school 20 years ago. First of all, is that the case? And I think you mentioned before the program, this multiple intelligence, how it's being used in the classroom, is that universally accepted?
I think that the focus really has to be on the instructional strategies and the environment. And when we're looking at a standard or an environment, which is what an accreditation is all about, they're looking at what kind of environment are the students learning in? Are they in an optimal learning environment according to the way the brain learns best? Are we accommodating the auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learner? Are we accommodating the children that are most comfortable with their particular strengths and weaknesses, and if we're even looking at the multiple intelligence theory? And that's really, when we're looking at the environment, we want to say to ourselves, are we accommodating the unique brain of every single student in that classroom? And with one teacher sitting in front of a classroom with little desks and chairs and everybody raising their hands, is that teacher capable of being a facilitator of learning for every single unique brain? And the answer to that is probably no, which is why our system may or may not be as effective as it could be. If we were to structurally and culturally change the environment of the way the children are learning, where we're taking the control away from the teacher, so to speak, and giving it to the children, so now we're developing skills that gives them the opportunity and control to learn the content in the way that their brains learn best.
And Mindy, you said there's, what, 8 levels? Or
Gardner has stated that to this point he's identified 8. So what does mathematics call for? What skills are involved in mathematics or social studies or gardening or anything else that we think is valued to do?
Well, Dr. Seidman, let me come to you and ask that same question. How does that teacher handle that, or is that the problem?
It's exactly, well, it could not be the problem, depending on the role of the teacher and the design of the classroom. So basically what we are doing is exactly what you said, Mindy, and that is focusing on the developing skills as opposed to memorizing content. And when we look at a statement such as being accused of watering down curriculum, well, are we watering down the amount of content that we're injecting into the classroom and compromising that where we're developing skills, when one doesn't have to be compromised for the other? Because basically when we're developing skills, it's kind of like, with a really basic example, if you give somebody a pie to eat, they can eat that one pie. If you teach somebody how to bake a pie, then they can bake many pies and sustain themselves. It's the same thing in the classroom. We're so focused on memorization of content. Well, now we're departmentalizing our brains. And now it's time to read, and now it's time to learn math, and now it's time to learn science. When basically we're living in a holistic world where all of these disciplines have to have an integrated understanding and relevance to somebody's life.
I think it's really interesting that both Howard Gardner and B.F. Skinner were both born and raised in this area. There's a Skinnerian view of education that I think we're still clinging to in our public schools, and
especially in our special educational system.
You know, and it's really difficult to change that paradigm. I think the paradigm has to be changed. I'm not so sure that that's going to happen anytime soon in schools, but I think that's why there are charter schools. I think there are charter schools because we're being asked to innovate, and I know our school, for one, is trying to find out how to bring these two things together, how to change the paradigm and still satisfy the regulations and the testing and high stakes testing. I'd like to ask Doc.
Actually, you stole that right from me. Sorry. That's okay. Dr. Seidman, let me come to you. So clarify this for me, what we just said. Is the use of multiple intelligence set theory and then the practical use of that in teaching, is that in direct conflict with standardized testing?
From my perspective, depending on the standardized test, if we're looking at a test that's developed, for example, in California, and that test is being or given to students in a classroom in Philadelphia, and the developers of the test in California have no clue as to the makeup, the student population, the content that's being taught, or the environment that's being taught in the school in Philadelphia, then I would have to say that there is no connection between the test and what we're actually assessing in the students in the classroom. So if we're looking at a theory of, we're looking to individualize to the unique brain of each child, or differentiated instruction, and we're giving them a standardized test for one specific brain, then I would have to say that that we're not really assessing what it is that the students actually know.
So the problem then is, and you had mentioned before the program that the testing, that's, I believe you used the word, that's the currency, that's how we evaluate folks coming out.
It's how we try to measure.
Right, so then the question is, how do we measure if we're not going to?
Unfortunately, there's a budget aspect here. It's a lot easier to give one test to 2,000 students and have a computer measure that or grade that test than it is to actually look at performance-based assessment and how we're integrating assessment in with the instructional strategies in the curriculum. So we're teaching something, then we want to assess it. We're teaching it, then we're assessing it. Well, an integrated assessment is almost, I guess, it's the opposite of what a standardized test is looking to do.
How would you advise me, since now I'm long retired and the way I taught them then, how would you advise me to do it differently using multiple intelligences? So I have a classroom of 20 kids.
Sure.
I would have no problem.
First of all, how did I do it 100 years ago? I don't remember.
I'm still trying to figure that out. Yeah, I don't really know. And it's something that Dr. Sousa said as well. And what he said was that the information has to be relevant, and if it's relevant, then it's emotionally safe, and the environment has to be emotionally safe. So when we're looking at stressful situations and we're looking at neurological neurotransmitters or chemicals in the brain. When we're stressed, neurotransmitters and chemicals are released that actually block our ability to think and our ability to connect up. So we become very emotional and we can't really learn or think. If a child is in an emotionally unsafe environment and they're feeling emotionally unsafe, then they're not going to be able to learn. So what do? We give the child choice and give them control. So when children have control and choice of the way they're going to learn, similar to understanding what their strengths are, then that's when they're going to be able to understand the content a lot better. It's going to be a lot more relevant. So if I'm going to learn math through singing songs because I feel emotionally safe through auditory or musical learning, then we're going to be able to understand how that child is going to learn math in a relevant, emotionally safe way for that particular child. Does that make sense to you?
I think so. So basically the old way of memorization, that's gone. That's out the window.
That's gone because everything is at our fingertips right now with technology. Why even use it? Where, and the departmentalizing of disciplines really should be gone as well, even though it's not. What we really need to be doing is looking at the total world, exploring, going outside, seeing how math relates to the different interests of the children. So if somebody is interested in biology, how does math integrate in with biology? If somebody's interested in the arts, then how are we going to express ourselves through the arts in learning how to read or in understanding literacy? And that will bring emotional safety and relevance to the child. Looking at it as a holistic approach, not as now it's time for math, now it's time for science.
Is there, I guess the simple question is, what is better? Or do we know what is better? Should that person know what all the planets' names are and the locations and everything about them, or know where to find that information?
Well, if the person is going to be work for NASA or be an astronomer, then yeah, he ought to know those by heart. But if it's just a passing bit of information, the recognition that there are other planets in our solar system, that they have different characteristics, is probably enough to get him through the understanding of what planets are.
Dr. Seidman?
Yeah, I believe that with putting the child in the environment where they are actually motivated, and I really believe that there's so much that we don't focus on the actual motivation of the student. If we focused on motivating, on instructional strategies that actually motivate the student, then we would have a tremendously enriched content. If we're introducing, for example, the solar system as a whole, and we have students getting excited about learning about the solar system, well, they're not going to have to memorize each one of the planets. They're going to want to explore and understand each one of the planets and then create their own solar system. And they can do that in so many different ways. And where we can also bring in multiple intelligences in that regard as well. So now with technology, everything's at their fingertips to explore as much or as little as they want to. We don't have to be shoving content or memorization down their throats. All we have to do is motivate them to make what's happening in their lives relevant and meaningful.
And I think, I'll come to you in a second, I think it goes back to the point Winston Churchill had said, when he was in grade school, or what we would call junior high here, there were several subjects that he failed because he simply had no interest in them. And they actually held him back, but that allowed him to take English 2 or 3 times, which he was very interested in, and he really, of course, able to grasp the use of the English language.
But if we were able to connect history and people's lives from the past and today to our children's lives, if we were able to understand science through history and math through experimentation in any different way, then now we're bringing relevance as part of our world, and where do we fit into our world, and understanding, well, there is a reason why I have to learn math. There is a reason why I have to read, because I want to accomplish building maybe that entire solar system that excited me.
I think there's another aspect of that, and I really think relevance is the issue. We're actually in schools pretending that everything is equally important and relevant to students in every subject. We promote the concept of straight A students. Einstein wasn't a straight A student. I think that we have to recognize that students have areas of tremendous interest And at certain points in the curriculum, we have to allow those students to study that and enrich themselves with that, because that's what's going to motivate them, because it's relevant.
Does that throw out the concept of a liberal arts education, where you don't just focus on one thing, but you focus on that as well as everything else? A well-rounded education.
What's wonderful about a liberal arts education is the fact that if someone has a wandering attention, the idea of the teacher bringing that wandering attention back to focus, and that becomes a job of great importance. If a teacher can bring a student's wandering attention to all of that myriad of their mind, all of those ideas that they might be interested in, if the liberal arts education that they have in front of them can incorporate that, and the teacher can bring that wandering attention back, that's an aim.
One philosophical question for you, Dr. Sosa, I'm going to go to the phones again. I'll just ask you what my 11-year-old asked. Why do I need to learn math when there's a calculator?
What do you do when you don't have the calculator?
But we do.
What do you do when the battery goes?
But that's not. And you mentioned technology, and here's the other one. Why do I have to learn how to write in cursive when we don't use that as a means of communication? Everything's typed.
Let's go back to the first question you asked about why do I have to learn math. Learning, understanding mathematical concepts, and we don't tend to teach it that way. Too often we teach in elementary school the procedure, and the kids never get a sense of number sense. They never understand how the arithmetic concepts work, so they follow procedures. And if we are going to help the brain develop new skills, remember, math and music, the same parts of the brain are used when the brain is doing math and creating music. So math allows us to develop certain skills apart from the 1 + 1 = 2 that will be beneficial in other ways as well. Our job is to try to develop the whole brain and not a one-sided brain. And I think Mr. Rizzo made an excellent point a while ago, if I may just jump in with this one, that the paradigm hasn't changed. Our school systems today are exactly the same as they were 100 years ago when you taught. It's in terms of their structure. It's the agrarian calendar. It's the industrial model. Every kid spends the same time in a grade, whether he needs it or not. And we just haven't adjusted that. The world has changed, schools haven't. I've often used the analogy that if we woke up somebody from a time capsule that he went into 100 years ago and asked him to go around the country and see what's changed, he'd say so many things have changed except schools. They're the same as they were then. That doesn't mean people aren't trying to do good things in them. But Mr. Rizzo's point about unless we start to change that paradigm, unless we start to get more flexible, hey, the brain is plastic, why don't we make schools plastic?
That's a fascinating comment. I want to open it up to the panel and get your comments on that.
We don't change it, I think, in part because our policymakers have certain needs. They need to take stock of a very large system, and the easiest way to take stock of a very large system is through standardized testing. And standardized testing standardizes the system and keeps it in the paradigm that Mr. Rizzo was talking about.
It's also not emotionally safe to change. When a teacher has been writing the same lesson plan for 20 years, then it's very difficult to tell that teacher that now they have to culturally and structurally change the entire environment of the class. Now that teacher is standing up and lecturing in front of a class maybe for an hour and a half, which is very brain unfriendly. Whereas that teacher needs to change to be the facilitator of learning, where they're actually encouraging and giving the choice to the students on how to explore the information that's being made available to the students.
Downsides of technology is the laptop now is the center of attention, and how to use the technology constructively, not just I own this cool iPad and I need to show you and here it is. How to use it constructively is a challenge. I would like to see creative products made through technology, not just testing through technology.
They need to be, students need to be engaged in the learning process. Technology should be a tool to being engaged in that learning process. So there is interaction, there is cooperative learning, and there is sharing of information. Sharing of information, though, can be the entire world because technology can bring that into the classroom as a tool, as a technique, not as in and of itself how the total content of what children are going to be doing.
I mean, technology is here. It's not going away. It's a tool.
Absolutely.
Technology isn't changing schools right now. We're changing technology, and we're finding kind of mundane uses for it.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time already. This has been a fascinating discussion, as I mentioned. The frustrating thing about this program is sometimes it's only an hour long, and we could certainly go on. I want to thank our panel members for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Kornhaber, Dr. Polizzi, Vince Rizzo, Dr. Seidman, and Dr. David Sosa. Thank you.